Welcome everybody to today's drop-in session. Today's sessions it's all about the central role manager. So probably those that are on the call are already aware that Skore's latest release. It delivers some new features and functionality in terms of workspace analytics. And today's session, as I said before, is centered around the new central role manager functionality that helps you to manage and understand the roles in your organization. So just a brief introduction to the latest release and what that means in terms of workspace analysis. Essentially, the existing analytics functionalities at the workspace level that were previously called modules, we've now called them business tools, and they all sit now at the workspace level. So this essentially allows us to unlock the treasure trove of data and knowledge that we input into our process maps. Previously, we could only look at them from a process lens. Now we've widened that open to the workspace as a whole. So that's all the analytic tools. So that's the role manager, the newly introduced system manager that Chris did a great presentation on a couple of sessions ago. That's on the YouTube channel if you want to check that out. But also the reporting and quantify modules. So as I said before, they're all under the banner of business tools. So contrary to current Skore, where they're modules. So in addition to that, there's a scoping tool that we'll have a look at in the context of roles in a bit. But essentially, if before process analysis was perhaps too smaller of a lens of analysis, maybe the workspace level is perhaps a little too large or too cumbersome. So the process scoping tool allows you to essentially select which processes are included in your analysis. So I'd say certainly from the conversations that I have, the most common use for process analytics is typically around roles and the management of roles. So in the latest release, roles are now created once or independent of a process, so they can be created outside of a process canvas itself, but they can be utilized in every single process map. So it's really a big improvement to the way that the central management of roles, in terms of what you can do in terms of the central management of roles. So you can generate comprehensive job descriptions for each role in the context of the whole workspace, as opposed to individual processes. So it helps you to form a real understanding of how a role is involved in each individual process, but also at a higher level of context as well. So with all these sessions, it's sort of dip into the why before we dip into the how, even though it is a majority are going to be a features and functionality session. So why do we need clarity of roles and responsibilities? Well, if we start with non-clarity of roles and responsibilities, it tends to create inefficiencies. So in that you can have all of your processes documented, perhaps have the latest and greatest systems, automating anything and everything. However, if people don't know what to do, or indeed who's doing the next activity in the process, who do they hand over to, who in the team is responsible for what, it creates a lot of wasted time. People picking up phone calls, people messaging, emailing for information. What is it you do in this particular process? That zaps energy, and it typically and generally results in a lower output of work. So having the clarity over roles and responsibilities is a really powerful thing, as I'm sure I don't need to tell a lot of you that's the case. But when you do have a good understanding of what roles and responsibilities are in the organisation, it's much easier to do continuous process improvement. That's the main goal of what we do at Skore, is to really instill a capability in an organisation to achieve continuous process improvement. So having a good understanding of the roles and responsibilities as a baseline means that you already know what people are doing today. It becomes much easier to find another level of process maturity. So you already understand where those gaps are, perhaps where the capability lies within the organisation and the roles that sit within the organisation. So having the typical conversations about who should be doing what and who should be responsible for what become much easier once you have that clarified baseline and something visible to share with your stakeholders and the wider organisation. So as I said before, this is going to be more of a functionality show and tell how it works. As I said, we're a small group, so do feel free to shout any questions out, put them in the chat. I'm sure Chris will feed them back to me, and we can more than happy to pick them up. But in the next sort of 10-15 minutes, We'll look at how we now manage and analyze roles in the workspace. And yeah, so these are some of so in the how section here, we'll look at, the basics of how we capture roles and responsibilities, how we analyze them. So looking at it from a process perspective, but also going up to the workspace level, understanding roles and systems. So again, alluded to the fact that Chris ran a session on systems. There is now a dedicated system manager, so we can start to see the relationship that roles have with systems. There's also the sort of more practical functionality of merging and renaming roles. I know that was a particular pain point for some people in terms of if a role in an organization changes, how do we change that centrally and cascade that change everywhere? So that's essentially what we can do here. So that also goes for merging. So sometimes somebody's used an acronym, maybe it's the BDE, and somebody else has referred to the BDE as the Business Development Executive. They're the same role, captured twice. We can merge those quite easily now and cascade that change everywhere. So I'll show you a bit about how that works. If we've got time, we'll look at roles and custom field analysis. So when we are capturing custom fields against activities, again, something we've discussed on previous sessions, and we will discuss in more detail on future sessions, is, if we're capturing things like risks, decision points, pain points, improvement opportunities, how do we look at that from the lens of a particular role or a subset of roles? So if we've got time, we'll move on to that. Roles and documentation, again, something very similar. And again, if we really do have time, we'll look at how the roles feed into other business tools, so quantify module and reporting and things like that. So before I get into it, any thoughts, any questions on what I've said? Some of the points that are on the screen. No, that's fine. I'll take silence as golden. We can move on. I thought one of the better processes we have for sort of depicting roles and how roles are utilised in a process is our advanced marketing process. So I'm going to take you off to that process now, and we'll just have a quick look at the roles that are captured. So this is for a bit of context, this is an advanced tech marketing process. It's quite a complex process in that it's depicting a whole department's process. But in the nature of Skore, it's quite simple. So it's the four main objects at the top here, the four main activities, and we've assigned a role to each of these activities. You'll see, for those familiar with responsibilities models, you'll recognise the R there. We've actually used RACI in this particular process as opposed to RACI. We'll come on to that while we've done that later on. But yeah, so really simple stuff. I won't try and tread old ground. Yeah, so we've got we tend to find single roles at the top of processes. So just displaying the one role at the top to keep things simple and understandable, we can quite clearly see who's responsible for these or potentially accountable for these activities. But as you drill down, so we drill down into create and update content, we start to see different types of roles appearing on activities. And as we scroll down or get down into the weeds a little bit more, we start to see more and more roles appearing on the same activities to show who's working on each activity. So we choose to use RACI on this particular process. There's a couple of our colleagues are sort of German and French, and as I understand it, Chris, you'll correct me if I'm wrong. In RACI terms, so RACI being a responsibility model, responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. The responsible and accountable doesn't translate so well into other languages, so it can be a point of confusion for some. So we tend to use the RACI responsibility model, which is responsible, authority, tasked, supported, and informed. So a slightly different flavour, a slightly different breakdown. You'll find they lend themselves different or better to different processes as well. So it can be the type of process that you're documenting lends itself better to one than the other. You've also got a couple of extra options with RACI. So essentially, a responsibilities model is a way to assign a responsibility to a role there. And the reason I'm giving you this context is because when we go and look at the role manager, you'll see how these bits of additional information that we've captured against the activity feed into the role manager as a whole. So again, probably for the benefit of the recording, but for those that are perhaps a little bit new on the call, how we actually assign, so back to basics, how do we assign a role to a given activity? So if I just create a what box on the screen here, I can double click or hit enter on my keyboard, and that opens up the what box in edit mode. So in the what happens, it's the activity text. Okay, and then predefined is you've got an empty space here for your roles. So when I click this button here, it now opens the edit panel, if you like, with this particular field, and it's here I can either select a role from the workspace. So all these roles that you're seeing here have either been defined in the central role manager, or they've been created in other processes. So we can pick from the list. Helps us to spell correctly, pick the right roles, but also negates the need to go and merge roles later on if we see an appropriate role in the list. So I can search for, if I don't know, search for employee, I can quite quickly find that there's somebody's already created an employee role. So this helps. This is your sort of first port of call, if you like, for workspace role management. So I select the employee there. Because I've got RACI assigned to this particular process, I can apply a responsibility. So here I'm just going to say that they're responsible and they're tasked in this particular activity. And when I click away, you'll see that that role is now assigned to that activity with a responsibility. So quite simple stuff. You'll see that there's other roles on these boxes. So if somebody says, you know, hey, somebody's working with the employee here, or somebody's informed of a particular activity step, I can go back into edit mode, and you'll see that I get two buttons here. I get an add role or an add system. It's simply just adding a new role, picking from the list, and assigning their particular responsibility. Okay, so that's assigning roles. I'm not going to take you through the process. There's not much need to. What I'll do is I'll take you off to the role manager, and we can start to look at how Skore takes that information we're inputting on the process, and it shows us it from the perspective of roles. So a bit of context to this screen. We're of course in the advanced tech marketing process. So we're looking at just the roles that appear in the advanced tech marketing process. And in here we can see quite quickly some sort of generic insights, you know, in terms of role utilization. So we can see here that the marketing manager has 82 assignments. They're appearing on 82 different activities within the process. We can also see that so instantly it's giving us sort of some useful insights. We can see that there are non-marketing roles that are appearing on this process. So this is telling us this is a cross-functional process. There are other roles in the business that are interfacing with the marketing team in some way. And we can start to look at how exactly they are interfacing with the process. And again, because we're using that responsibilities model, we can start to see what their involvement type is. But if I take the marketing manager as an example, gives me an opportunity to show you this filter here. Not sure why that's happened there. So I should be able to use this filter. So if I hit mark for marketing, it should find me the marketing manager, and I can click the marketing manager, and now I'm looking at the marketing manager's work within the particular tech marketing process. So similar for those that have had exposure to the older version of Skore, this will look very similar, just with perhaps a bit of a refreshed UI. So here we're seeing that we get some sort of high-level insights in terms of the involvement of the marketing manager in this process, but we can start to see all the processes. In this case, we're looking at it just from a lens of a tech marketing, but all the activities that they're involved in within the process. So it's starting to build up those job descriptions, work activity lists, if you like. And again, because we've assigned those responsibility, we can start to see the type of responsibility that role has on any given activity. It also feeds into the reporting function. So if I wanted to take an extract of this and sort of develop an Excel report in terms of the activities that this role was involved in, I can hit open report here, and that takes me off to the reporting business tool to go and do that sort of targeted analysis. And anywhere you see blue, so blue links like this, these are links directly back to the process. So if I wanted to talk about their task involvement in monitoring the implementation of the plans, I can click on that text there, and that will take me to that exact activity box within the process. So I can quite quickly, I've seen people use this as a bit of a discussion piece in sessions to talk through the activities in this lens, and then go off to the relevant part to have a look at it in more context. And then as we scroll down, this looks a little bit daunting, but it's because the marketing manager's quite heavily involved in this particular process. What we start to see is their involvement with other roles within the process. So because of the methodology that underpins Skore, UPN, and the way that we build processes out with that input, activity, and outcome function, and we're linking processes to activities together, we can start to understand both the roles that are appearing on preceding boxes. So we call these suppliers. So we can see that the marketing director is handing over work 12 times to the marketing manager. So they're working quite closely together. And these lists they're ordered in terms of how many times another role interfaces with another. So again, it really drives that importance on the Y box, because essentially the Y box is what will detail what that handover is. How do we know when the marketing director's finished their activity and it gets handed over to the marketing manager? So these can be some quite interesting insights. Start to find here people that you didn't think talk to each other should be talking to each other, and things like that. And then collaborators. So just to give a brief explanation in terms of what these mean, collaborators are essentially the roles that appear on the same boxes. So these are the roles that the marketing manager is working with quite closely. So whether they're supporting on these activities or whether they're being tasked, whether they're accountable or responsible, we can start to see that breakdown above. And I think a product improvement that's certainly mentioned a few times, and certainly one that I'd like to see, is the ability when we hover over these is to see exactly where those involvements are. So look out for that in the future. I think that would be a good implementation. And then customers, so very similar to suppliers. These are roles that are appearing on succeeding boxes. So the boxes that are occurring directly after. So again, it's showing how many times the marketing manager's handing over to the product marketing manager and alike. Okay. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to jump back to the process, and we'll actually jump back to. We'll take an activity here. So we're going to look at define themes. So I've clicked on there. It should take me to the define themes box. It highlights it purple for me. Now the reason I take it to this box is because I've preloaded it with some attachment data to show you some of the other capabilities of the role manager. So define themes. You'll see that I've added a system. So that's pertinent when we go back and look at the systems that this particular role works with. And then I've also attached some attachment data. So here, I've added a procedural document. So as most of you are probably aware, you can attach documentation to activity steps. And the beauty is that because the roles are associated with that activity, we can start to see exactly all the different documentation that particular role works with in the organization. Similarly, if I'm capturing URL links off to other systems maybe, or other sites, we can start to see all the different artifacts and information that a role uses in their day-to-day life. And then if I go to edit mode, there's also other things that we can start to attribute. So this is more getting onto the sort of the custom field analysis, which I don't want to touch upon too much, but just to sort of signpost you to it. So if we have defined themes here, maybe there's a decision step. So we're deciding on the key themes which external communications will be based. So we might say that this is a decision step, and if we've got some predefined groupings here, but we might say that this is an approval activity. Now, what that allows me to do, or what the custom field allows me to do, is to attach structured data now to that activity, which, because we've got a set of roles against it, the marketing manager being one, there's now that association there in the back end. So if I close that panel down and hit save to save my changes, and I go off to the business tools and the role manager again, I can find the marketing manager. When the screen loads for me, I can scroll down, and so you'll see here, we can see that the marketing manager is working with these systems. So again, another insight that you can generate. Works in a very similar way to the roles do above. Which systems are providing information? So it looks like the marketing manager receives some sort of notification on Slack or a message on Slack, but they're also working with Dynamics 365 on that defined themes piece. So we can start to see, you know, if we decide that we're doing a new system implementation and we're removing Dynamics 365 in the business, we can click on to Dynamics 365 here, and we can start to see all the different roles from the different perspective, exactly who works with this particular role. Again, Chris covered this on a session from the system perspective. But if I go down to the attachments here, you'll start to see that information that we've captured against the activity. So as I said before, because we're capturing it on the activity itself and the roles associated, we now get a view of this is depicting the process that we're in. This is telling us the attachment, the activity itself, and then we start to see what information has been captured. So we can start to see we're using this particular documentation, and custom fields will also show up here.